Letter 1 of Clarissa Harlowe, Volume 6. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Clarissa Harlowe, Volume 6, by Samuel Richardson. Letter 1. Mr. Lovelace, to John Belford, Esquire, Saturday midnight. No rest is a text that I once heard preached upon to the wicked, and I cannot close my eyes, yet only wanted to compound for half an hour in an elbow chair, so must scribble on. I parted with the captain after another strong debate with him in relation to what is to be the fate of this lady. As the fellow has an excellent head, and would have made an eminent figure in any station of life, had not his early days been tainted with a deep crime, and he detected in it, and as he had the right side of the argument, I had a good deal of difficulty with him, and at last brought myself to promise, that if I could prevail upon her generously to forgive me, and to reinstate me in her favour, I would make it my whole endeavour to get off of my contrivances as happily as I could, only that Lady Betty and Charlotte must come, and then, substituting him for her uncle's proxy, take shame to myself, and marry. But if I should, Jack, with the strongest antipathy to the state that ever man had, what a figure shall I make in rakish annals? And can I have taken all this pains for nothing? Or for a wife only, that however excellent, and any woman do I think I could make good, because I could make any woman fear as well as love me, might have been obtained without the plague I have been at, and much more reputably than with it? And hast thou not seen that this haughty woman, forgive me that I call her haughty, and a woman, yet is she not haughty, knows not how to forgive with graciousness, indeed has not at all forgiven me, but holds my soul in a suspense which has been so grievous to her own. At this silent moment, I think that if I were to pursue my former scheme, and resolve to try whether I cannot make a greater fault serve as a sponge to wipe out the less, and then be forgiven for that, I can justify myself to myself, and that, as the fair Invincible would say, is all in all. As it is my intention in all my reflections to avoid repeating, at least dwelling upon, what I have before written to thee, though the state of the case may not have varied, so I would have thee to reconsider the old reasonings, particularly those contained in my answer to thy last expostulatory nonsense, and add the new as they fall from my pen, and then I shall think myself invincible, at least as arguing rake to rake. See Volume 5, Letter 14. I take the gaining of this lady to be essential to my happiness. And is it not natural for all men to aim at obtaining whatever they think will make them happy, be the object more or less considerable in the eyes of others? As to the manner of endeavouring to obtain her, by falsification of oaths, vows, and the like, do not the poets of 2000 years and upwards tell us that Jupiter laughs at the perjuries of lovers? And let me add to what I have heretofore mentioned on that head a question or two. Do not the mothers, the aunts, the grandmothers, the governesses of the pretty innocents, always from their very cradles to riper years, preach to them the deceitfulness of men, that they are not to regard their oaths, vows, promises? What a parcel of fibbers! What all these reverend matrons be, if there were not now and then a pretty credulous rogue taken in for a justification of their preachments, and to serve as a beacon lighted up for the benefit of the rest? Do we not then see that an honest prowling fellow is a necessary evil on many accounts? Do we not see that it is highly requisite that a sweet girl should be now and then drawn aside by him? And the more eminent the girl in the graces of person, mind, and fortune, is not the example likely to be the more efficacious? If these postulata be granted me, who, I pray, can equal my charmer in all these? Who, therefore, so fit for an example to the rest of her sex? At worst, I am entirely within my worthy friend Mandeville's assertion that private vices are public benefits. Well, then, if this sweet creature must fall, as it is called, for the benefit of all the pretty fools of the sex, she must, and there is an end of the matter. And what would there have been in it of uncommon or rare, had I not been so long about it? And so I dismiss all further argumentation and debate upon the question, and I impose upon thee, when thou writest to me, an eternal silence on this head. Wavered on, as an after-written introduction to the paragraphs which follow, marked with turned commas, thus: Lord, Jack, what shall I do now? How one evil brings on another! How dreadful news to tell thee! While I was meditating a simple robbery, here have I, in my own defence indeed, been guilty of murder. A bloody murder, so I believe it will prove, at her last gasp. O poor impertinent opposer, eternally resisting, eternally contradicting, there she lies weltering in her blood. Her death's wound have I given her. But she was a thief, an impostor, as well as a tormentor. She had stolen my pen, while I was sullenly meditating, doubting as to my future measures. She stole it, and thus she wrote with it, in a hand exactly like my own, and would have faced me down, that it was really my own handwriting. But let me reflect before it is too late, on the manifold perfections of this ever amiable creature. Let me reflect. The hand yet is only held up. The blow is not struck. Miss Howe's next letter may blow thee up. In policy thou shouldest be now at least honest. Thou canst not live without her. Thou wouldest rather marry her than lose her absolutely. Thou mayest undoubtedly prevail upon her, inflexible as she seems to be, for marriage. But if now she finds thee a villain, thou mayest never more engage her attention, and she perhaps will refuse and abhor thee. Yet already have I not gone too far? Like a repentant thief afraid of his gang, and obliged to go on in fear of hanging till he comes to be hanged, I am afraid of the gang of my cursed contrivances. As I hope to live, I am sorry, at the present writing, that I have been such a foolish plotter, as to put it, as I fear I have done, out of my own power to be honest. I hate compulsion in all forms, and cannot bear even to be compelled to be the wretch my choice has made me. So now, Belford, as thou hast said, I am a machine at last, and no free agent. Upon my soul, Jack, it is a very foolish thing for a man of spirit to have brought himself to such a height of iniquity, that he must proceed, and cannot help himself, and yet to be next to certain that this very victory will undo him. Why was such a woman as this thrown in my way, whose very fall will be her glory, and perhaps not only my shame, but my destruction? What a happiness must that man know, who moves regularly to some laudable end, and has nothing to reproach himself with in his progress to do it, when by honest means he attains his end, how great and unmixed must be his enjoyments! What a happy man in this particular case had I been, had it been given me to be only what I wished to appear to be! Thus far had my conscience written with my pen, and see what a recreant she had made of me. I seized her by the throat. There, there, said I, thou vile impertinent, take that, and that. How often have I got thee warning? And now, I hope, thou intruding varletess, have I done thy business? Puling and low-voiced, rearing up thy detested head, in vain implorest thou my mercy, who in thy day hast showed me so little. Take that for a rising blow. And now will thy pain, and my pain for thee, soon be over. Lie there, welter on. Had I not given thee thy death's wound, thou wouldst have robbed me of all my joys. Thou couldst not have mended me, 'tis plain. Thou couldst only have thrown me into despair. Didst thou not see that I had gone too far to recede? Welter on once more, I bid thee. Gasp on, that thy last gasp, surely. How hard diest thou! Adieu, unhappy man, adieu. 'Tis kind in thee, however, to bid me adieu. Adieu, adieu, adieu to thee, O thou inflexible, until now unconquerable bosom intruder! Adieu to thee for ever. End of Letter I. Letter II of Clarissa Harlowe, Volume 6. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Clarissa Harlowe, Volume 6, by Samuel Richardson. Letter 2. Mr. Lovelace, to John Belford, Esquire. Sunday morn, June 11, 4 o'clock. A few words to the verbal information thou sentest me last night concerning thy poor old man. And then I rise from my seat, shake myself, refresh, new dress, and so to my charmer, whom, notwithstanding her reserves, I hope to prevail upon to walk out with me on the heath this warm and fine morning. The birds must have awakened her before now. They are in full song. She always gloried in accustoming herself to behold the sun rise, one of God's natural wonders, as once she called it. Her window salutes the east. The valleys must be gilded by his rays by the time I am with her, for already have they made the uplands smile, and the face of nature cheerful. How unsuitable wilt thou find this gay preface to a subject so gloomy as that I am now turning to! I am glad to hear thy tedious expectations are at last answered. Thy servant tells me that thou art plaguily grieved at the old fellow's departure. I can't say but thou mayest look as if thou wert, harassed as thou hast been for a number of days and nights with a close attendance upon a dying man, beholding his drawing-on hour, pretending for decency's sake to whine over his excruciating pangs, to be in the way to answer 1,000 impertinent inquiries after the health of a man thou wishest to die, to pray by him, for so once thou wrotest to me, to read by him, to be forced to join in consultation with a crew of solemn and parading doctors, and their officious zanies, the apothecaries joined with the butcherly tribe of scarificators, all combined to carry on the physical farce, and to cut out thongs both from his flesh and his estate, to have the superadded apprehension of dividing thy interest in what he shall leave, with a crew of eager hoping, never to be satisfied relations, legatees, and the devil knows who, of private gratifiers of passions, laudable and illaudable. In these circumstances, I wonder not that thou lookest before servants as little grieved as thou after heirship, as if thou indeed wert grieved, and as if the most wry-faced woe had befallen thee. Then, as I have often thought, the reflection that must naturally arise from such mortifying objects, as the death of one with whom we have been familiar, must afford, when we are obliged to attend it in its slow approaches and in its face-twisting pangs, that it will one day be our own case, goes a great way to credit the appearance of grief. And that it is this, seriously reflected upon, may temporarily give a fine air of sincerity to the wailings of lively widows, heart-exulting heirs, and residuary legatees of all denominations, since, by keeping down the inward joy, those interesting reflections must sadden the aspect, and add an appearance of real concern to the assumed sables. Well, but now thou art come to the reward of all thy watchings, anxieties, and close attendances, tell me what it is. Tell me if it compensate thy trouble, and answer thy hope. As to myself, thou seest, by the gravity of my style, how the subject has helped to mortify me. But the necessity I am under of committing either speedy matrimony or a rape has saddened over my gayer prospects, and more than the case itself, contributed to make me sympathize with the present joyful sorrow. Adieu, Jack. I must be soon out of my pain, and my Clarissa shall be soon out of hers, for so does the arduousness of the case require. End of Letter 2. Letter 3 of Clarissa Harlowe, Volume 6. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Clarissa Harlowe, Volume 6, by Samuel Richardson. Letter 3. Mr. Lovelace to John Belford, Esquire. Sunday morning. I have had the honour of my charmer's company for 2 complete hours. We met before 6 in Mrs. Moore's garden. A walk on the heath refused me. The sedateness of her aspect and her kind compliance in this meeting gave me hopes, and all that either the captain and I had urged yesterday to obtain a full and free pardon, that re-urged I. And I told her besides that Captain Tomlinson was gone down with hopes to prevail upon her uncle Harlowe to come up in person, in order to present to me the greatest blessing that man ever received. but the utmost I could obtain was, that she would take no resolution in my favour till she received Miss Howe's next letter. I will not repeat the arguments I used, but I will give thee the substance of what she said in answer to them. She had considered of everything, she told me. My whole conduct was before her. The house I carried her to must be a vile house. The people early showed what they were capable of, in the earnest attempt made to fasten Miss Partington upon her, as she doubted not, with my approbation. Surely, thought I, she has not received the duplicate of Miss Howe's letter of detection. They heard her cries. My insult was undoubtedly premeditated by my whole recollected behaviour to her. Previous to it, it must be so. I had the vilest of views, no question, and my treatment of her put it out of all doubt. Soul over all, Belford, she seemed sensible of liberties that my passion made me insensible of having taken, or she could not so deeply resent. She besought me to give over all thoughts of her. Sometimes, she said, she thought herself cruelly treated by her nearest and dearest relations. At such times a spirit of repining, and even of resentment, took place, and the reconciliation at other times so desirable was not then so much the favourite wish of her heart, as was the scheme she had formerly planned, of taking her good Norton for her directress and guide, and living upon her own estate, in the manner her grandfather had intended she should live. This scheme, she doubted not that her cousin Morden, who was one of her trustees for that estate, would enable her, and that, as she hoped, without litigation, to pursue. And if he can, and does, what, Sir, let me ask you, said she, have I seen in your conduct that should make me prefer to it an union of interest, where there is such a disunion in minds? Ha! So thou seest, Jack, there is reason as well as resentment in the preference she makes against me. Thou seest that she presumes to think that she can be happy without me, and that she must be unhappy with me. I had besought her, in the conclusion of my re-urged arguments, to write to Miss Howe before Miss Howe's answer could come, in order to lay before her the present state of things, and if she would pay a deference to her judgment, to let her have an opportunity to give it, on the full knowledge of the case. So I would, Mr. Lovelace, was the answer, if I were in doubt myself which I would prefer, marriage or the scheme I have mentioned. You cannot think, Sir, but the latter must be my choice. I wish to part with you with temper. Don't put me upon repeating. Part with me, madam, interrupted I. I cannot bear those words. But let me beseech you, however, to write to Miss Howe, I hope,
If Miss Howe is not my enemy,
she is not the enemy of your person, sir, as you would be convinced if you saw her last letter to me. The lady innocently means Mr. Lovelace's forged one. See Volume 5, Letter 30. But were she not an enemy to your actions, she would not be my friend, nor the friend of virtue. Why will you provoke from me, Mr. Lovelace, the harshness of expression which, however deserved by you, I am unwilling just now to use, having suffered enough in the 2 past days from my own vehemence? I bit my lip for vexation, and was silent. Miss Howe, proceeded she, knows the full state of matters already, sir. The answer I expect from her respects myself, not you. Her heart is too warm in the cause of friendship to leave me in suspense one moment longer than is necessary as to what I want to know. Nor does her answer absolutely depend upon herself. She must see a person first, and that person, perhaps, see others. The cursed smuggler woman, Jack! Miss Howe's Townsend, I doubt not. Plot, contrivance, intrigue, stratagem, underground moles, these women. But let the earth cover me. Let me be a mole too, thought I, if they carry their point, and if this lady escape me now. She frankly owned that she had once thought of embarking out of all our ways for some one of our American colonies. But now that she had been compelled to see me, which had been her greatest dread, and which she might be happiest in the resumption of her former favourite scheme, if Miss Howe could find her a reputable and private asylum, till her cousin Morden could come. But if he came not soon, and if she had a difficulty to get to a place of refuge, whether from her brother or from any body else, meaning me, I suppose, she might yet perhaps go abroad. For, to say the truth, she could not think of returning to her father's house, since her brother's rage, her sister's upbraidings, her father's anger, her mother's still more affecting sorrowings, and her own consciousness under them all, would be unsupportable to her. Oh, Jack, I am sick to death. I pine, I die for Miss Howe's next letter. I would bind, gag, strip, rob, and do any thing but murder to intercept it. But, determined as she seems to be, it was evident to me, nevertheless, that she had still some tenderness for me. She often wept as she talked, and much oftener sighed. She looked at me twice with an eye of undoubted gentleness, and 3 times with an eye tending to compassion and softness. But its benign rays were as often snatched back, as I may say, and her face averted, as if her sweet eyes were not to be trusted, and could not stand against my eager eyes, seeking, as they did, for a lost heart in hers, and endeavouring to penetrate to her very soul. More than once I took her hand. She struggled not much against the freedom. I pressed it once with my lips. She was not very angry. A frown indeed, but a frown that had more distress in it than indignation.
How came the dear soul, clothed as it is with such a silken vesture, by all its steadiness? Was it necessary that the active gloom of such a tyrant of a father should commix with such a passive sweetness of a will-less mother, to produce a constancy, an equanimity, a steadiness in the daughter, which never woman before could boast of? If so, she is more obliged to that despotic father than I could have imagined a creature to be, who gave distinction to every one related to her beyond what the crown itself can confer. See Volume I, Letters 9, 14, and 19, for what she herself says on that steadiness, which Mr. Lovelace, though a deserved sufferer by it, cannot help admiring. I hoped, I said, that she would admit of the intended visit, which I had so often mentioned, of the two ladies. She was here. She had seen me. She could not help herself at present. She even had the highest regard for the ladies of my family, because of their worthy characters. There she turned away her sweet face, and vanquished and half-risen sigh. I kneeled to her then. It was upon a verdant cushion, for we were upon the grass-walk. I caught her hand. I besought her with an earnestness that called up, as I could feel, my heart to my eyes, to make me, by her forgiveness and example, more worthy of them and of her own kind and generous wishes. By my soul, Madam, said I, you stab me with your goodness, your undeserved goodness, and I cannot bear it. Why, thought I, as I did several times in this conversation, will she not generously forgive me? Why will she make it necessary for me to bring Lady Betty and my cousin to my assistance? Can the fortress expect the same advantageous capitulation, which yields not to the summons of a resistless conqueror, as if it gave not the trouble of bringing up and raising its heavy artillery against it? What sensibilities, said the divine creature, withdrawing her hand, must thou have suppressed? What a dreadful, what a judicial hardness of heart must thine be, who canst be capable of such emotions as sometimes thou hast shown, and of such sentiments as sometimes have flowed from thy lips, yet canst have so far overcome them all, as to be able to act as thou hast acted, and that from settled purpose and premeditation. And this, as it is said, throughout the whole of thy life, from infancy to this time. I told her that I had hoped, from the generous concern she had expressed for me, when I was so suddenly and dangerously taken ill, the ipecacuanha experiment, Jack. She interrupted me. Well have you rewarded me for the concern you speak of. However, I will frankly own, now that I am determined to think no more of you, that you might, unsatisfied as I nevertheless was with you, have made an interest. She paused. I besought her to proceed. Do you suppose, sir, and turned away her sweet face as we walked, do you suppose that I had not thought of laying down a plan to govern myself by, when I found myself so unhappily overreached and cheated, as I may say, out of myself? when I found that I could not be and do what I wished to be and to do? Do you imagine that I had not cast about what was the next proper course to take? And do you believe that this next course has not caused me some pain to be obliged to— There again she stopped. But let us break off discourse, resumed she. The subject grows too. She sighed. Let us break off discourse. I will go in. I will prepare for church. The devil, thought I. Well, as I can appear in these every-day worn clothes, looking upon herself, I will go to church. She then turned from me to go into the house. Bless me, my beloved creature! Bless me with the continuance of this affecting conversation. Remorse has seized my heart. I have been excessively wrong. Give me farther cause to curse my heedless folly by the continuance of this calm but soul-penetrating conversation. No, no, Mr. Lovelace, I have said too much. Impatience begins to break in upon me. If you can excuse me to the ladies, it will be better for my mind's sake, and for your credit's sake, that I do not see them. Call me to them over nice, petulant, prudish, what you please, call me to them. Nobody but Miss Howe, to whom, next to the Almighty and my own mother, I wish to stand acquitted of wilful error, shall know the whole of what has passed. Be happy as you may. Deserve to be happy, and happy you will be, in your own reflection at least, were you to be ever so unhappy in other respects. For myself, if I ever shall be enabled, on due reflection, to look back upon my own conduct without the great reproach of having wilfully and against the light of my own judgment erred, I shall be more happy than if I had all that the world counts desirable. The noble creature proceeded, for I could not speak. This self-acquittal, when spirits are lent me to dispel the darkness which at present too often overclouds my mind, will, I hope, make me superior to all the calamities that can befall me. Her whole person was informed by her sentiments. She seemed to be taller than before. How the God within her exalted her, not only above me, but above herself. Divine creature! As I thought her, I called her. I acknowledged the superiority of her mind, and was proceeding, but she interrupted me. All human excellence, said she, is comparative only. My mind, I believe, is indeed superior to yours, debased as yours is by evil habits. But I had not known it to be so, if you had not taken pains to convince me of the inferiority of yours. How great, how sublimely great this creature! By my soul, I cannot forgive her for her virtues. There is no bearing the consciousness of the infinite inferiority she charged me with. But why will she break from me when good resolutions are taking place? The red-hot iron she refuses to strike. Oh, why will she suffer the yielding wax to harden? We had gone but a few paces towards the house, when we were met by the impertinent woman, with notice that breakfast was ready. I could only with uplifted hands beseech her to give me hope of a renewed conversation after breakfast. No, she would go to church. And into the house she went, and up stairs directly, nor would she oblige me with her company at the tea-table. I offered, by Mrs. Moore, to quit both the table and the parlour, rather than she should exclude herself, or deprive the two widows of the favour of her company. That was not all the matter, she told Mrs. Moore. She had been struggling to keep down her temper. It had cost her some pains to do it. She was desirous to compose herself, in hopes to receive benefit by the divine worship she was going to join in. Mrs. Moore hoped for her presence at dinner. She had rather be excused. Yet, if she could obtain the frame of mind she hoped for, she might not be averse to show that she had got above those sensibilities which gave consideration to a man who deserved not to be to her what he had been. This said, no doubt, to let Mrs. Moore know that the garden conversation had not been a reconciling one. Mrs. Moore seemed to wonder that we were not upon a better foot of understanding after so long a conference, and the more as she believed that the lady had given in to the proposal for the repetition of the ceremony, which I had told them was insisted upon by her uncle Harlowe. But I accounted for this by telling both widows that she was resolved to keep on the reserve till she heard from Captain Tomlinson whether her uncle would be present in person at the solemnity, or would name that worthy gentleman for his proxy. Again I enjoyed strict secrecy as to this particular, which was promised by the widows, as well as for themselves, as for Miss Rawlins, of whose taciturnity they gave me such an account as showed me that she was secret keeper general to all the women of fashion at Hampstead. The Lord, Jack! What a world of mischief at this rate must Miss Rawlins know! What a Pandora's box must her bosom be! Yet, had I nothing that was more worthy of my attention to regard, I would engage to open it, and make my uses of the discovery. And now, Belford, thou perceivest that all my reliance is upon the mediation of Lady Betty and Miss Montague, and upon the hope of intercepting Miss Howe's next letter.
End of Letter 3. Letter 4 of Clarissa Harlowe, Volume 6. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Clarissa Harlowe, Volume 6, Letter 4. Mr. Lovelace, to John Belford, Esquire. This fair inexorable is actually gone to church with Mrs. Moore and Mrs. Bevis, but Will closely attends her motions, and I am in the way to receive any occasional intelligence from him. She did not choose a mighty word with the sex, as if they were always to have their own wills, that I should wait upon her. I did not much press it, that she might not apprehend that I thought I had reason to doubt her voluntary return. I once had it in my head to have found the widow Bevis other employment, and I believe she would have been as well pleased with my company as to go to church, for she seemed irresolute when I told her that 2 out of a family were enough to go to church for one day. But having her things on, as the women call everything, and her Aunt Moore expecting her company, she thought it best to go, lest it should look oddly, you know, whispered she to one who was above regarding how it looked. So here am I in my dining-room, and have nothing to do but to write till they return. And what will be my subject, thinkest thou? Why, the old beaten one, to be sure, self-debate through temporary remorse for the blow being not struck. Her guardian angel is redoubling his efforts to save her. If it be not that,
And yet what power should her guardian angel have over me? I don't know what it is that gives a check to my revenge whenever I meditate treason against so sovereign a virtue. Conscience is dead and gone, as I told thee, so it cannot be that. A young conscience growing up like the phoenix from the ashes of the old one, it cannot be, surely. Ah, but if it were, it would be hard if I could not overlay a young conscience. Well, then, it must be love, I fancy, love itself, inspiring love of an object so adorable, some little attention possibly paid likewise to thy whining arguments in her favour. Let love, then, be allowed to be the moving principle, and the rather as love naturally makes the lover loath to disoblige the object of its flame, and knowing that to an offence of the meditated kind will be a mortal offence to her, cannot bear that I should think of giving it. Let love and me talk together a little on this subject, be it a young conscience, or love, or thyself, Jack. Thou seest that I am for giving every whiffler audience. But this must be the last debate on this subject. For is not her fate in a manner at its crisis? And must not my next step be an irretrievable one, tend it which way it will? And now the debate is over. A thousand charming things, for love is gentler than conscience, as this little urchin suggested in her favour. He pretended to know both our hearts, and he would have it that though my love was a prodigious, strong, and potent love, and though it has the merit of many months' faithful service to plead, has had infinite difficulties to struggle with, yet that it is not the right sort of love. Right sort of love, a puppy! But with due regard to your deityship, said I, what merits has she with you, that you should be of her party? Is hers, I pray you, a right sort of love? Is it love at all? She don't pretend that it is. She owns not your sovereignty. What the devil moves you to plead thus earnestly for a rebel who despises your power? And then he came with his ifs and ands, and it would have been, and still, as he believed, would be love, and a love of the exalted kind, if I would encourage it by the right sort of love he talked of, and in justification of his opinion pleaded her own confessions, as well those of yesterday as of this morning, and even went so far back as to my ipecacuana illness. I never talked so familiarly with his godship before. Thou mayest think, therefore, that his dialect sounded oddly in my ears. And then he told me how often I had thrown cold water upon the most charming flame that ever warmed a lady's bosom, while but young and rising. I require the definition of this right sort of love. He tried at it, but made an sorry hand of it. Nor could I, for the soul of me, be convinced that what he meant to extol was love. Upon the whole, we had a noble controversy upon this subject, in which he insisted upon the unprecedented merit of the lady. Nevertheless, I got the better of him, for he was struck absolutely dumb when, waiving her present perverseness, which yet was a sufficient answer to all his pleas, I asserted, and offered to prove it, by 1,000 instances impromptu, that love was not governed by merit, nor could be under the dominion of prudence, or any other reasoning power. And if the lady were capable of love, it was of such a sort as he had nothing to do with, and which never before reigned in a female heart. I asked him what he thought of her flight from me, at a time when I was more than half overcome by the right sort of love he talked of. And then I showed him the letter she wrote, and left behind her for me, with an intention, no doubt, absolutely to break my heart, or to provoke me to hang, drown, or shoot myself, to say nothing of a multitude of declarations from her, defying his power, and imputing all that looked like love in her behaviour to me, to the persecution and rejection of her friends, which made her think of me but as a last resort. Love then gave her up. The letter, he said, deserved neither pardon nor excuse. He did not think he had been pleading for such a declared rebel. And as to the rest, he should be a betrayer of the right of his own sovereignty, if what I had alleged were true, and he was still to plead for her. I swore to the truth of all. And truly I swore, which perhaps I do not always do. And now what thinkest thou must become of the lady whom love itself gives up, and conscience cannot plead for? End of Letter 4. Letter 5 of Clarissa Harlowe, Volume 6. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Clarissa Harlowe, Volume 6, by Samuel Richardson. Letter 5. Mr. Lovelace, to John Belford, Esquire, Sunday afternoon. Oh, Belford, what a hair's breadth escape have I had! Such a one that I tremble between terror and joy at the thought of what might have happened and did not. What a perverse girl is this, to contend with her fate, yet has reason to think that her very stars fight against her. I am the luckiest of men. Ah, but my breath almost fails me when I reflect upon what a slender thread my destiny hung. But not to keep thee in suspense, I have, within this half hour, obtained possession of the expected letter from Miss Howe, and by such an accident that here, with the former, I dispatch this. Thy messenger waiting. End of Letter 5. Letter 6 of Clarissa Harlowe, Volume 6. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Clarissa Harlowe, Volume 6, by Samuel Richardson. Letter 6. Mr. Lovelace, in continuation. Thus it was. My charmer accompanied Mrs. Moore again to church this afternoon. I had been in very earnest, in the first place, to obtain her company at dinner, but in vain. According to what she had said to Mrs. Moore, see Letter 3 of this volume, I was too considerable to her to be allowed that favour. In the next place, I besought her to favour me after dinner with another garden walk, but she would again go to church. and what reason have I to rejoice that she did? My worthy friend, Mrs. Bevis, thought one sermon a day well observed enough, so stayed at home to bear me company. The lady and Mrs. Moore had not been gone a quarter of an hour when a young country fellow on horseback came to the door and inquired for Mrs. Harriet Lucas. The widow and I, undetermined how we were to entertain each other, were in the parlour next the door, and hearing the fellow's inquiry, "Oh, my dear Mrs. Bevis," said I am undone for ever, if you don't help me out, since here, in all probability, is a messenger from that implacable Miss Howe, with a letter which, if delivered to Mrs. Lovelace, may undo all we have been doing.
"What,"
said she,
"would you have me do?"
"Call the maid in this moment, that I may give her her lesson, and if it be as I imagined, I'll tell you what you shall do."
"Margaret! Margaret! Come in this minute."
What answer, Mistress Margaret, did you give the man upon his asking for Mrs. Harriet Lucas?
He only asked what was his business and who he came from. For, sir, your honour's servant had told me how things stood, and I came at your call, madam, afore he answered me.
Well, child, if ever you wish to be happy in wedlock yourself, and would have people disappointed who want to make mischief between you and your husband, get out of him his message, or letter if he has one, and bring it to me, and say nothing to Mrs. Lovelace when she comes in, and here is a guinea for you."
"I will do all I can to serve your honour's worship for nothing."
Nevertheless, with a ready hand, taking the guinea.
"For Mr. William tells me what a good gentleman you be."
Away went Peggy to the fellow at the door.
"What is your business, friend, with Mrs. Harry Lucas?"
"I must speak to her own self."
My dearest widow, do you personate Mrs. Lovelace? For heaven's sake, do you personate Mrs. Lovelace?
"I personate Mrs. Lovelace, sir? How can I do that? She is fair, I am brown. She is slender, I am plump."
No matter, no matter. The fellow may be a new-come servant. He is not in livery, I see. You may not know her person. You can but be bloated and in a dropsy.
"Dropsical people look not so fresh and ruddy as I do."
True, but the clown may not know that. 'Tis but for a present deception. "Peggy, Peggy," called I, in a female tone, softly at the door. "Madam," answered Peggy, and came up to me to the parlour door. "Tell him the lady is ill, and has lain down upon the couch, and get his business from him, whatever ye do." Away went Peggy. "Now, my dear widow, lie along the settee, and put your handkerchief over your face, that if he will speak to you himself, he may not see your eyes and your hair, sir. That's right. I'll step into the closet by you." I did so, returning.
"He won't deliver his business to me. He'll speak to Mrs. Harriet Lucas her own self,"
holding the door in my hand. "Tell him that this is Mrs. Harriet Lucas, and let him come in. Whisper him, if he doubts, that she is bloated, dropsical, and not the woman she was." Away went Marjorie. And now, my dear widow, let me see what a charming Mrs. Lovelace you'll make. Ask if he comes from Miss Howe. Ask if he lives with her. Ask how she does. Call her at every word your dear Miss Howe. Offer him money. Take this half-guinea for him. Complain of your head, to have a pretence to hold it down, and cover your forehead and eyes with your hand, where your handkerchief hides not your face. That's right. And dismiss the rascal. Here he comes, as soon as you can. In came the fellow, bowing and scraping, his hat poked out before him with both his hands.
I am sorry, madam, ain't please you, to find you bean't well.
What is your business with me, friend?
You are Mrs. Harriet Lucas, I suppose, madam.
Yes. Do you come from Miss Howe?
I do, madam.
Dost thou know my right name, friend?
I can give a shrewd guess, but that is none of my business.
What is thy business? I hope Miss Howe is well?
Yes, madam, pure well. I thank God. I wish you were so too.
I am too full of grief to be well.
So belike I have hard to say.
My head aches so dreadfully I cannot hold it up. I must beg of you to let me know your business.
Nay, and that be all my business is soon known. It is but to give this letter into your own particular hands. Here it is.
From my dear friend Miss Howe? Ah, my head!
Yes, madam, but I am sorry you are so bad.
Do you live with Miss Howe?
No, madam, I am one of her tenant's sons. Her lady mother must not know as how I came of this errand, but the letter, I suppose, will tell you all.
How shall I satisfy you for this kind trouble?
No how at all. What I do is for love of Miss Howe. She will satisfy me more than enough, but mayhap you can send no answer, you are so ill.
Was you ordered to wait for an answer?
No, I cannot say as that I was, but I was bidden to observe how you looked, and how you was, and if you did write a line or two, to take care of it, and give it only to our young landlady in secret.
You see I look strangely, not so well as I used to do.
Nay, I don't know that I ever saw you but once before, and that was at a stile, where I met you and my young landlady, but knew better than to stare a gentlewoman in the face, especially at a stile.
Will you eat or drink, friend?
A cup of small ale, I don't care if I do.
Margaret, take the young man down, and treat him with what the house affords.
Your servant, madam. But I stayed to eat as I came along just upon the heath yonder, or else, to say the truth, I had been here sooner.
Thank my stars, thought I, thou didst.
A piece of powdered beef was upon the table at the sign of the castle, where I stopped to inquire for this house, and so, though I intended to wet my whistle, I could not help eating. So shall only taste of your ale, for the beef was woundily corned.
Prating dog, pox on thee, thought I. He withdrew, bowing and scraping. Margaret, whispered I, in a female voice, whispering out of the closet, and holding the parlour door in my hand, get him out of the house as fast as you can, lest they come from church and catch him here.
Never fear, sir.
The fellow went down, and, it seems, drank a large draught of ale, and Margaret, finding him very talkative, told him she begged his pardon, but she had a sweetheart just come from sea, whom she was forced to hide in the pantry, so was sure he would excuse her from staying with him. Ay, ay, to be sure, the clown said, for if he could not make sport, he would spoil none. But, he whispered her, that one Squire Lovelace was a damnation rogue, if the truth might be told.
For what?
Said Margaret, and could have given him, she told the widow, who related to me all this, a good douse of the chaps, for kissing all the women he came near. At the same time, the dog wrapped himself round Marjorie, and gave her a smack that, she told Mrs. Bevis afterwards, she might have heard into the parlour. Such, Jack, is human nature. Thus does it operate in all degrees, and so does the clown, as well as his practices. Yet this sly dog knew not but the wench had a sweetheart locked up in the pantry. If the truth were known, some of the ruddy-faced dairy wenches might perhaps call him a damnation rogue, as justly as their betters of the same sex might Squire Lovelace. The fellow told the maid that, by what he discovered of the young lady's face, it looked very rosy to what he took it to be, and he thought her a good deal fatter as she lay, and not so tall. All women are born to intrigue, Jack, and practise it more or less, as fathers, guardians, governesses, from dear experience can tell. and in love affairs are naturally expert and quicker in their wits by half than men. This ready though raw wench gave an instance of this, and improved on the dropsical hint I had given her. The lady's seeming plumpness was owing to a dropsical disorder, and to the round posture she lay in, very likely truly. Her appearing to him to be shorter, he might have observed, was owing to her drawing her feet up from pain, and because the couch was too short, she supposed. So he did not think of that. Her rosy colour was owing to her grief and headache. Ay, that might very well be, but he was highly pleased that he had given the letter into Mrs. Harriet's own hand, as he should tell Miss Howe. He desired once more to see the lady at his going away, and would not be denied. The widow therefore sat up with her handkerchief over her face, leaning her head against the wainscot. He asked if she had any particular message. No, she was so ill she could not write. It was a great grief to her. Should he call the next day, for he was going to London, now he was so near, and should stay at a cousin's that night, who lived in a street called Fetter Lane. No, she would write as soon as able, and send by the post. Well, then, if she had nothing to send by him, mayhap he might stay in town a day or two, for he had never seen the lions in the tower, nor Bedlam, nor the tombs, and he would make a holiday or two, as he had leave to do, if she had no business or message that required his posting down next day. She had not. She offered him the half-guinea I had given her for him, but he refused it, with great professions of disinterestedness and love, as he called it, to Miss Howe, to serve whom he would ride to the world's end, or even to Jericho. And so the shocking rascal went away, and glad at my heart was I when he was gone, for I feared nothing so much as that he would have stayed till they came from church. Thus, Jack, got I my heart's ease the letter of Miss Howe, and through such a train of accidents as makes me say that the lady's stars fight against her. But yet I must attribute a good deal to my own precaution in having taken right measures. For had I not secured the widow by my stories, and the maid by my servant, all would have signified nothing. And so heartily were they secured, the one by a single guinea, the other by 6 warm kisses, and the aversion they both had to such wicked creatures as delighted in making mischief between man and wife, that they promised that neither Mrs. Moore, Miss Rawlins, Mrs. Lovelace, nor any body living should know anything of the matter. The widow rejoiced that I had got the mischief-maker's letter. I excused myself to her, and instantly withdrew with it, and after I had read it, fell to my shorthand to acquaint thee with my good luck. And they not returning so soon as church was done, stepping, as it proved, into Miss Rawlins's, and tarrying there a while, to bring that busy girl with them to drink tea, I wrote thus far to thee, that thou mightest, when thou camest to this place, rejoice with me upon the occasion. They are all just come in. I hasten to them. End of Letter 6. Letter 7 of Clarissa Harlowe, Volume 6. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Clarissa Harlowe, Volume 6, by Samuel Richardson. Letter 7. Mr. Lovelace, to John Belford, Esquire. I have begun another letter to thee, in continuation of my narrative. But I believe I shall send thee this before I shall finish that. By the enclosed thou wilt see that neither of the correspondents deserve mercy from me, and I am resolved to make the ending with one, the beginning with the other. If thou sayest that the provocations I have given to one of them will justify her freedoms, I answer, so they will, to any other person but myself. But he that is capable of giving those provocations, and has the power to punish those who abuse him for giving them, will show his resentment, and the more remorselessly perhaps, as he has deserved the freedoms. If thou sayest it is, however, wrong to do so, I reply that it is nevertheless human nature. And wouldst thou not have me to be a man, Jack? Here, read the letter if thou wilt, but thou art not my friend, if thou offerest to plead for either of the saucy creatures after thou hast read it.
To Mrs. Harriot Lucas, at Mrs. Moore's at Hampstead, June 10. After the discoveries I had made of the villainous machinations of the most abandoned of men, particularized in my long letter of Wednesday last, you will believe, my dearest friend, that my surprise upon perusing yours of Thursday evening from Hampstead was not so great as my indignation. Had the villain attempted to fire a city instead of a house, I should not have wondered at it. All that I am amazed at is, that he, whose boast, as I am told, it is, that no woman shall keep him out of her bedchamber, when he has made a resolution to be in it, did not discover his foot before. And it is as strange to me, that, having got you at such a shocking advantage, and in such a horrid house, you could at the time escape dishonour, and afterwards get from such a set of infernals. I gave you in my long letter of Wednesday and Thursday last reasons why you ought to mistrust that specious Tomlinson. That man, my dear, must be a solemn villain. May lightning from heaven blast the wretch who has set him and the rest of his remorseless gang at work to endeavour to destroy the most consummate virtue. Heaven be praised, you have escaped from all their snares, and now are out of danger. So I will not trouble you at present with the particulars I have further collected relating to this abominable imposture. For the same reason I forbear to communicate to you some new stories of the abhorred wretch himself which have come to my ears. One, in particular, of so shocking a nature. Indeed, my dear, the man's a devil. The whole story of Mrs. Fretchville and her house I have no doubt to pronounce, likewise, an absolute fiction. Fellow, how my soul spurns the villain! You thought of going abroad, and your reasons for so doing most sensibly affect me. But be comforted, my dear. I hope you will not be under a necessity of quitting your native country. Were I sure that that must be the cruel case, I would abandon all my better prospects, and soon be with you, and I would accompany you whithersoever you went, and share fortunes with you. For it is impossible that I should be happy, if I knew that you were exposed not only to the perils of the sea, but to the attempts of other vile men, your personal graces attracting every eye, and exposing you to those hourly dangers which others, less distinguished by the gifts of nature, might avoid. All that I know that beauty, so greatly coveted and so greatly admired, is good for. Oh, my dear, were I ever to marry, and to be the mother of a Clarissa, Clarissa must be the name, if promisingly lovely, how often would my heart ache for the dear creature, as she grew up, when I reflected that a prudence and discretion, unexampled in woman, had not, in you, been a sufficient protection to that beauty, which had drawn after it as many admirers as beholders. How little should I regret the attacks of that cruel distemper, as it is called, which frequently makes the greatest ravages in the finest faces. Saturday afternoon. I have just parted with Mrs. Townsend. I thought you had once seen her with me, but she says she never had the honor to be personally known to you. She has a manlike spirit. She knows the world, and her 2 brothers being in town, she is sure she can engage them in so good a cause, and, if there should be occasion, both their ships' crews in your service. Give your consent, my dear, and the horrid villain shall be repaid with broken bones, at least for all his vileness. The misfortune is, Mrs. Townsend cannot be with you till Thursday next, or Wednesday at soonest. Are you sure you can be safe where you are till then? I think you are too near London, and perhaps you had better be in it. If you remove, let me, the very moment, know whither. How my heart is torn to think of the necessity so dear a creature is driven to of hiding herself. Devilish fellow! He must have been sportive and wanton in his inventions, yet that cruel. That savage supportiveness has saved you from the sudden violence to which he has had recourse in the violation of others, of names and families not contemptible. For such the villain always gloried to spread his snares. The vileness of this specious monster has done more than any other consideration could do, to bring Mr. Hickman into credit with me. Mr. Hickman alone knows from me of your flight, and the reason of it. Had I not given him the reason, he might have thought still worse of the vile attempt. I communicated it to him by showing him your letter from Hampstead. When he had read it, and he trembled and reddened as he read, he threw himself at my feet, and besought me to permit him to attend you, and to give you the protection of his house. The good-natured man had tears in his eyes, and was repeatedly earnest on this subject, proposing to take his chariot in 4, or a set, and in person, in the face of all the world, give himself the glory of protecting such an oppressed innocent. I could not but be pleased with him, and I let him know that I was. I hardly expected so much spirit from him, but a man's passiveness to a beloved object of our sex may not, perhaps, argue want of courage on proper occasions. I thought I ought, in return, to have some consideration for his safety, as such an open step would draw upon him the vengeance of the most villainous enterpriser in the world, who has always a gang of fellows, such as himself, at his call, ready to support one another in the vilest outrages. But yet, as Mr. Hickman might have strengthened his hands by legal recourses, I should not have stood upon it, had I not known your delicacy, since such a step must have made a great noise, and given occasion for scandal, as if some advantage had been gained over you. And were there not the greatest probability that all might be more silently and more effectually managed by Mrs. Townsend's means? Mrs. Townsend will in person attend you, she hopes, on Wednesday. Her brothers, and some of their people, will scatteringly, and as if they knew nothing of you, so we have contrived, see you safe, not only to London, but to her house at Deptford. She has a kinswoman who will take your commands there, if she herself be obliged to leave you, and there you may stay till the wretch's fury on losing you and his search are over. He will very soon, 'tis likely, enter upon some new villainy which may engross him, and it may be given out that you are gone to lay claim to the protection of your cousin Morden at Florence. Possibly, if he can be made to believe it, he will go over in hopes to find you there. After a while I can procure you a lodging in one of our neighbouring villages, where I may have the happiness to be your daily visitor. And if this Hickman be not silly and appish, and if my mother do not do unaccountable things, I may the sooner think of marrying, that I may, without control, receive and entertain the darling of my heart. Many, very many happy days do I hope we shall yet see together, and as this is my hope, I expect that it will be your consolation. As to your estate, since you are resolved not to litigate for it, we will be patient, either till Colonel Morden arrives, or till shame compels some people to be just. Upon the whole, I cannot but think your prospects now much happier than they could have been, had you been actually married to such a man as this. I must therefore congratulate you upon your escape, not only from a horrid libertine, but from so vile a husband as he must have made to any woman, but more especially to a person of your virtue and delicacy. You hate him, heartily hate him, I hope, my dear. I am sure you do. It would be strange if so much purity of life and manners were not to abhor what is so repugnant to itself. In your letter before me, you mention one written to me for a feint. I have not received any such, depend upon it, therefore, that he must have it. And if he has, it is a wonder that he did not likewise get my long one of the 7th. Heaven be praised that he did not, and that it came safe to your hands. I send this by a young fellow, whose father is one of our tenants, with command to deliver it to no other hands but yours. He is to return directly, if you give him any letter. If not, he will proceed to London upon his own pleasures. He is a simple fellow, but very honest, so you may say anything to him. If you write not by him, I desire a line or two, as soon as possible. My mother knows nothing of his going to you, nor yet of your abandoning the fellow. Forgive me, but he is not entitled to good manners. I shall long to hear how you and Mrs. Townsend order matters. I wish she could have been with you sooner, but I have lost no time in engaging her. As you will suppose, I refer to her what I have further to say and advise. So shall conclude with my prayers that Heaven will direct and protect my dearest creature, and make your future days happy. Anna Howe.
And now, Jack, I will suppose that thou hast read this cursed letter. Allow me to make a few observations upon some of its contents. It is strange to Miss Howe, that having got her friend at such a shocking advantage, etc. And it is strange to me too, if ever I have such another opportunity given to me. The cause of both our wonder, I believe, will cease. So thou seest Tomlinson is further detected. No such person as Mrs. Fretchville. May lightning from heaven! O Lord, O Lord, O Lord, what a horrid vixen is this! My gang, my remorseless gang, too, is brought in. And thou wilt plead for these girls again, wilt thou? Heaven be praised, she says, that her friend is out of danger. Miss Howe should be sure of that, and that she herself is safe. But for this termagant, as I often said, I must surely have made a better hand of it. New stories of me, Jack! What can they be? I have not found that my generosity to my Rosebud ever did me due credit with this pair of friends. Very hard, Belford, that credits cannot be set against debits, and a balance struck in a rake's favour, as well as in that of every common man. But he, from whom no good is expected, is not allowed the merit of the good he does. I ought to have been a little more attentive to character than I have been. For notwithstanding that the measures of right and wrong are said to be so manifest, let me tell thee that character biases and runs away with all mankind. Let a man or woman once establish themselves in the world's opinion, and all that either of them do will be sanctified. Nay, in the very courts of justice, does not character acquit or condemn as often as facts, and sometimes even in spite of facts? Yet, impolitic that I have been and am, to be so careless of mine, and now I doubt it is irretrievable. But to leave moralizing. Thou, Jack, knowest almost all my enterprises worth remembering. Can this particular story, which this girl hints at, be that of Lucy Villas? Or can she have heard of my intrigue with the pretty gipsy, who met me in Norwood, and of the trap I caught her cruel husband in, a fellow as gloomy and tyrannical as old Harlowe, when he pursued a wife who would not have deserved ill of him, if he had deserved well of her? But he was not quite drowned. The man is alive at this day, and Miss Howe mentions the story as a very shocking one. Besides, both these are 12-month-old or more. But evil fame and scandal are always new. When the offender has forgot a vile fact, it is often told to one and to another, who, having never heard of it before, trumpet it about as a novelty to others. But well said the honest corregidor at Madrid, a saying with which I encroached Lord M.'s collection. Good actions are remembered but for a day, bad ones for many years after the life of the guilty. Such is the relish that the world has for scandal. In other words, such is the desire which every one has to exculpate himself by blackening his neighbour. You and I, Belford, have been very kind to the world in furnishing it with opportunities to gratify its devil. Miss Howe will abandon her own better prospects and share fortunes with her, were she to go abroad. Charming romancer! I must set about this girl, Jack. I have always had hopes of a woman whose passions carry her to such altitudes. Had I attacked Miss Howe first, her passions, inflamed and guided as I could have managed them, would have brought her into my lure in a fortnight. But thinkest thou, and yet I think thou dost, that there is any thing in these high flights among the sex? Verily, Jack, these vehement friendships are nothing but chaff and stubble, liable to be blown away by the very wind that raises them. Apes, mere apes of us! They think the word friendship has a pretty sound with it, and it is much talked of, a fashionable word. And so truly a single woman who thinks she has a soul, and knows that she wants something, will be thought to have found a fellow soul for it in her own sex. But I repeat that the word is a mere word, the thing a mere name with them, a cork-bottomed shuttlecock, which they are fond of striking to and fro to make one another glow in the frosty weather of a single state, but which, when a man comes in between the pretended inseparables, is given up, like their music and other maidenly amusements, which nevertheless may be necessary to keep the pretty rogues out of active mischief. They then, in short, having caught the fish, lay aside the net. He alludes here to the story of a pope, who, once a poor fisherman, through every preferment he rose to, even to that of the cardinalate, hung up, in view of all his guests, his net, as a token of humility. But when he arrived at the pontificate, he took it down, saying that there was no need of the net when he had caught the fish. Thou hast a mind, perhaps, to make an exception for these two ladies. With all my heart. My Clarissa has, if woman has, a soul capable of friendship. Her flame is bright and steady. But Miss Howe's, were it not kept up by her mother's opposition, is too vehement to endure. How often have I known opposition not only cement friendship, but create love? I doubt not but poor Hickman would fare the better with this vixen, if her mother were as heartily against him as she is for him. Thus much indeed as to these two ladies, I will grant thee, that the active spirit of the one, and the meek disposition of the other, may make their friendship more durable than it would otherwise be. For this is certain, that in every friendship, whether male or female, there must be a man and a woman spirit, that is to say, one of them must be a forbearing one, to make it permanent. But this I pronounce as a truth, which all experience confirms, that friendship between women never holds to the sacrifice of capital gratifications, or to the endangering of life, limb, or estate, as it often does in our nobler sex. Well, but next comes an indictment against poor Beauty. What has Beauty done that Miss Howe should be offended at it? Miss Howe, Jack, is a charming girl. She has no reason to quarrel with Beauty. Didst ever see her? Too much fire and spirit in her eye, indeed, for a girl, but that's no fault with a man that can lower that fire and spirit at pleasure, and I know I am the man that can. For my own part, when I was first introduced to this lady, which was by my goddess, when she herself was a visitor at Mrs. Howe's, I had not been half an hour with her, but I even hungered and thirsted after a romping bout with the lively rogue, and in the second or third visit was more deterred by the delicacy of her friend than by what I apprehended from her own. This charming creature's presence, thought I, awes us both, and I wished her absence, though any other woman were present, that I might try the differences in Miss Howe's behaviour before her friend's face or behind her back. Delicate women make delicate women, as well as decent men. With all Miss Howe's fire and spirit, it was easy to see by her very eye that she watched for lessons and feared reproof from the penetrating eye of her milder dispositioned friend. Miss Howe, in Volume 3, Letter 19, says that she was always more afraid of Clarissa than of her mother, and in Volume 3, Letter 44, that she fears her almost as much as she loves her, and in many other places in her letters verifies this observation of Lovelace. And yet it was as easy to observe in the candour and sweet manners of the other, that the fear which Miss Howe stood in of her was more owing to her own generous apprehension that she fell short of her excellences, than to Miss Harlowe's consciousness of excellence over her. I have often, since I came at Miss Howe's letters, revolved this just and fine praise contained in one of them. See Volume 4, Letter 31. Every one saw that the preference they gave you to themselves exalted you, not into any visible triumph over them, for you had always something to say on every point you carried, that raised the yielding heart, and left every one pleased and satisfied with themselves, though they carried not off the palm. As I propose, in a more advanced life, to endeavour to atone for my useful freedoms with individuals of the sex, by giving cautions and instructions to the whole, I have made a memorandum to enlarge upon this doctrine, to wit, that it is full as necessary to direct daughters in the choice of their female companions, as it is to guard them against the designs of men. I say not this, however, to the disparagement of Miss Howe. She has from pride what her friend has from principle. The Lord help the sex if they had not pride. But yet I am confident that Miss Howe is indebted to the conversation and correspondence of Miss Harlowe for her highest improvements. But both these ladies out of the question. I make no scruple to aver, and I, Jack, should know something of the matter, that there have been more girls ruined, at least prepared for ruin, by their own sex, taking in servants as well as companions, than directly by the attempts and delusions of men. But it is time enough, when I am old and joyless, to enlarge upon this topic. As to the comparison between the two ladies, I will expatiate more on that subject, for I like it, when I have had them both. which this letter of the Vixen girls, I hope thou wilt allow, warrants me to try for, I return to the consideration of a few more of its contents to justify my vengeances so nearly now in view. As to Mrs. Townsend, the manlike spirit, the 2 brothers, and the ship's crews, I say nothing but this to the insolent threatening, let him come. But as to her sordid menace, to repay the horrid villain, as she calls me, for all my vileness by broken bones. Broken bones, Belford. Who can bear this porterly threatening? Broken bones, Jack. Damn the little bogger. Give me a name for her. But I banish all furious resentment. If I get these 2 girls into my power, heaven forbid that I should be a second Phalaris, who turned his bull upon the artist. No bones of theirs will I break. They shall come off with me upon much lighter terms. But these fellows are smugglers, it seems, and am not I a smuggler too? I am, and have not the least doubt but I shall have secured my goods before Thursday or Wednesday either. But did I want a plot, what a charming new one does this letter of Miss Howe strike me out! I am almost sorry that I have fixed upon one, for here how easy would it be for me to assemble a crew of swabbers, and to create a Mrs. Townsend, whose person thou seest my beloved knows not, to come on Tuesday at Miss Howe's repeated solicitations, in order to carry my beloved to a warehouse of my own providing. This, however, is my triumphant hope, that at the very time that these ragamuffins will be at Hampstead looking for us, my dear Miss Harlowe and I, so the fates, I imagine, have ordained, shall be fast asleep in each other's arms in town. Lie still, villain, till the time come. My heart, Jack, my heart, it is always thumping away on the remotest prospects of this nature. But it seems that the vileness of this specious monster, meaning me, Jack, has brought Hickman into credit with her. So I have done some good, but to whom I cannot tell, for this poor fellow, should I permit him to have this termagant, will be punished, as many times we all are, by the enjoyment of his own wishes. Nor can she be happy, as I take it, with him, were he to govern himself by her will, and have none of his own, since never was there a directing wife who knew where to stop. Power makes such a one wanton. She despises the man she can govern, like Alexander, who wept that he had no more worlds to conquer. She'll be looking out for new exercises for her power, till she grow uneasy to herself, a discredit to her husband, and a plague to all about her. But this honest fellow, it seems, with tears in his eyes, and with humble prostration, besought the vixen to permit him to set out in his chariot and four, in order to give himself the glory of protecting such an oppressed innocent in the face of the whole world. Oh, nay! He reddened, it seems, and trembled too, as he read the fair complainant's letter. How valiant is all this! Women love brave men, and no wonder that his tears, his trembling, and his prostration gave him high reputation with the meek Miss Howe. But dost think, Jack, that I, in the like case, and equally affected with the distress, should have acted thus? Dost think that I should not first have rescued the lady, and then, if needful, have asked excuse for it, the lady in my hand? Wouldst not thou have done thus as well as I? But 'tis best as it is. Honest Hickman may now sleep in a whole skin, and yet that is more perhaps than he would have done, the lady's deliverance unattempted, had I come at this requested permission of his any other way than by a letter that it must not be known that I have intercepted. Miss Howe thinks I may be diverted from pursuing my charmer by some new-started villainy. Villainy is a word that she is extremely fond of, but I can tell her that it is impossible I should, till the end of this villainy be obtained. Difficulty is a stimulus with such a spirit as mine. I thought Miss Howe knew me better. Were she to offer herself person for person in the romancing zeal of her friendship, to save her friend, it should not do while the dear creature is on this side the moon. She thanks Heaven that her friend has received her letter of the 7th. We are all glad of it. She ought to thank me too, but I will not at present claim her thanks. But when she rejoices that the letter went safe, does she not, in effect, call out for vengeance, and expect it? All in good time, Miss Howe. When settest thou out for the Isle of Wight, love? I will close it this time, with desiring thee to make a list of the virulent terms with which the enclosed letter abounds, and then, if thou supposest that I have made such another, and have added to it all the flowers of the same blow, in the former letters of the same saucy creature, and those in that of Miss Harlowe, which she left for me on her elopement, thou wilt certainly think that I have provocation sufficient to justify me in all that I shall do to either. Return the enclosed the moment thou hast perused it. End of Letter 7.